The Jungle Baby by G. E. Farrow. There was once a little boy called Baba. He had bright blue eyes and golden curls, and he had Aya for his nurse. She had been with Baba ever since he was quite a tiny baby in long robes, and she was very fond of him. Her name was Jijiwala, but they just called her Aja. Baba lived in a beautiful white house in the Simla Hills with a big veranda running all around it. Round about the veranda was a garden, and outside the garden the jungle stretched for miles and miles, and in the jungle were all sorts of beasts and birds. Little Baba used to play on the veranda with his pets, Mew Mew, the cat, and Woof Woof, the dog, and they both loved him very dearly. Mew Mew never scratched him when he accidentally pulled her tail, although she felt very much like doing so, and Woof Woof used to stand on his hind legs and perform all sorts of funny tricks to make Baba laugh. Every morning after breakfast, Baba threw breadcrumbs out to the little birds on the lawn, and they used to sit in the trees and watch for him and sing about him till he came out of the house. "Good little Baba who gives us our food," one would sing, and "We all love little Baba," several of the others would reply from another part of the garden. Mew Mew used to watch them out of the corner of her eyes, but she never attempted to catch them because she knew that Baba loved them, and Woof Woof used to sit with his head on one side and wonder however they managed with only 2 legs and not 4 like his. But one day, when Baba was feeding the birdies, the big snake Hoodoo, who lived in the garden, came creeping under the veranda and tried to catch some of the birds while they were eating. But Baba saw him and called out, "Go away, bad Hoodoo, go away!" And his Aya heard him and came running out to see what was the matter. When she saw Hoodoo, the big snake, she caught Baba up in her arms and ran with him into the house, and 2 of the men came out with big sticks and beat Hoodoo over the head and body till he could hardly crawl away again into his hole under a big tree in the garden. Now Hoodoo was a very wicked snake and was very angry about all this, and he thought and thought about it and wondered how he could be revenged on little Baba, for he put all that had occurred down to him. And so one day, after he'd got better, he went out into the jungle to see an old friend of his, Tig the tiger, and talk the matter over with him. Hoodoo thought that Tig the tiger was as greedy and cruel as he was himself, and so he asked him how he would like a little fat baby boy for his dinner, and Tig licked his lips and said, we shall see." Then Hoodoo went further into the jungle and met Prowl the wolf. "How would you like a little fat baby to eat?" asked Hoodoo, and Prowl the wolf licked his lips and said, "Ha!" and nothing else. A little further on, Hoodoo met Bluff, the big brown bear, and he asked him what he would do if he met a fat little baby in the jungle. And Bluff stood up on his hind legs, hugged himself and said, "Oof, very nice indeed." And then Poonda, the big wild elephant, came crushing through the jungle, and Hoodoo had to scurry out of his way so that he didn't get trampled upon. "How would you like a little fat?" he screamed out, but Poonda made a loud noise with his trunk and went on, for he didn't converse with snakes. Nevertheless, Hoodoo was satisfied, for he said, "If Poonda would trample on me in passing, so he would on a little baby if he were here," and his wicked black beady eyes were bright, and he laughed maliciously. After this, Hoodoo went home to his hole under the tree in Baba's father's garden and watched and waited till Baba should be quite by himself, and one day, when Woof Woof had gone off after a wild rabbit, and Mew Mew was fast asleep in the sun, and Aya went into the house to fetch Baba's Noah Ark, he was left alone on the veranda. Then Hoodoo came sliding out of his hole very quickly and stood before the veranda, waving his head backwards and forwards and shooting out his little tongue, while the sun showed all the colours of the rainbow on his smooth, shiny skin. "Oh, pretty Hoodoo," said Baba, "but you're naughty, go away." "No," said Hoodoo sweetly, "I'm not naughty, dear Baba, and I know where some such beautiful flowers grow. Come with me and I'll show you." "No," said Baba, shaking his head, but Hoodoo continued to look at him steadily, and presently Baba slid down from the veranda and came towards him. Then Hoodoo laughed and drew back quickly into the thick part of the garden, with Baba running after him. When the ayah returned to the veranda with Baba's Noah's Ark, and she saw his little empty chair and Mew Mew asleep in the sun, she grew alarmed and ran about calling Baba's name and wringing her hands, and Baba's mother came out, and his father, and they and some other men hunted about in the garden for a very long while, but could not find any trace of him, and Mew Mew woke up and wondered what all the commotion was about, and Woof Woof came back without the rabbit and wondered too. Woof Woof went over to where Mew Mew was sitting and talked the matter over with her. While they were talking, some little birds overhead called out to them to attract their attention. "Baba," they said, "Baba has followed Hoodoo the snake into the jungle, and he will be lost and eaten by the wild beasts unless he is brought back. Quick, quick, go after him, haste." And so Woof Woof ran to Baba's father and mother and tried to tell them. He ran backwards and forwards towards the jungle and barked and tried to make them follow, but they wouldn't understand, and so at last he had to set out himself to try and find him. Now after Baba had followed Hoodoo a little way through the garden, the snake turned to a little path which led to a hole broken in the wall. "You must crawl through here," said Hoodoo. "The pretty flowers are on the other side." So Baba crawled through and found himself in the jungle. Further on," cried Hoodoo, every time Baba stopped to gather any. "There are pretty ones further on." And so Baba went on and on until he came to where Tig the tiger lay asleep in the long grass. "Now's your time," whispered Hoodoo in his ear. "Here's the little baby for your dinner." And Tig sprang up with a roar. But Baba wasn't a bit frightened, and he only laughed and said, "What a big, big Mew Mew!" And he put his arms around Tig's neck and nestled his head in his soft fur till Tig forgot all about his dinner and purred with delight, just like Mew Mew did when she was pleased. Hoodoo was very angry at this, and finding that Tig was making friends with Baba instead of eating him up, he called Baba to him and said, "Come, let us be going, or we shall be late home." And Baba kissed Tig, the tiger, and followed Hoodoo further into the jungle until they met Prowl, the wolf. "Here's the little baby," whispered Hoodoo. And Prowl said, "Ha!" and was going to spring upon him and eat him up. But Baba only laughed and said, "What a big woof woof," and patted him on the head and looked into his eyes so that Prowl forgot all about eating him and licked his hands and frisked about him just as Woof Woof would have done. "This is silly," said Hoodoo angrily. "Come away, it is near to sunset and we must be getting home." And he led the way to where Bluff, the big brown bear, lived. "I've brought the little baby for you," said Hoodoo. And Bluff said, "Oof, very nice indeed." And he caught Baba up in his arms and hugged him. "Just like my ayah does," laughed Baba, and he patted Bluff's cheeks and kissed him, so that Bluff didn't want to eat him at all, but only to hug him and keep him warm. Just then there was a loud trumpeting heard, and Bluff put Baba down to the ground, and Hoodoo slid off into the grass, hissing, "Now Poonda is coming, and you will be trampled to death. Goodbye, little Baba, I hate you." But when Poonda came and saw the little baby, he remembered that he had not always been a wild elephant, but had once himself belonged to a man, and so he picked up little Baba with his trunk and placed him gently on his back. And that's the position in which Baba's father found him when at last he had understood Woof Woof's barking and had followed him into the jungle, accompanied by some men armed with guns and sticks. Woof Woof traced the little boy by his scent till they came upon him riding on Poondoo's back. And now a funny thing happened, for amongst the men was one who had once been Poonda's keeper, and Poonda remembered him and allowed himself to be led by him to Baba's home. And so they returned in triumph, with Baba and his father on Poonda's back, and good Woof Woof barking and frisking by his side. The wicked Hoodoo was justly punished, for just as he was going into his hole under the tree, he met an old enemy of his, Tiv the mongoose, and the two fought and fought for a long while, till at last Hoodoo was exhausted and stretched himself out and died, while little Tiv sat up and rubbed his paws together to clean them, and then skipped off to his new little home under Baba's veranda, where he still lives, to keep away any other wicked snakes from harming him. The end.